Hey, everybody. I hope you're well. Joe Morrison with the 49SAF pod, providing you the intro to the two-part, first ever live recording of the podcast. You're about to listen to our North by North talks, a great conference held in April in Alaska. Held every year. I highly recommend you guys check it out if you haven't. Speaking of conferences, speaking of interesting things going on in the community, let's briefly break down what's happening in our community starting next week. I can't even keep it all in my head. You can go check out alaskastartups.com and you should be able to see a list of everything that's going on. So what's happening on Monday, June 25th, 2018? 49SAF has two things going on. One is at 9:30. If you're an angel investor or you're interested in angel investment, we're talking about a new initiative we'd like to see happen in our community next year called Alaska Angel Conference 2019. On this recording, you'll hear from John Seacrest. He's the founder of Seattle Angel Conference. We want to bring that concept to Alaska starting next year, and you can think of it as American Idol for startups. If you're an angel investor, please see if you can hang out with us the morning of June 25th, 9:30 a.m., Mayor's Conference Room, City Hall, Anchorage. And then at 12 p.m., I'm going to be teaching a pitch clinic with Kevin Croy from our advisory committee, who's a Seattle-based venture capitalist at the seed stage. He runs 9 Mile Labs. We're going to be talking about how you can deliver an effective pitch, and this is a qualifier workshop if you're participating in the Shark Tank contest on Wednesday night, Wednesday the 27th. What else is going on? So much. We've got our usual advisory committee meeting on Tuesday the 26th. On Wednesday the 27th is the Vitalize Alaska Conference. Highly recommend this if you like North by North, if you're really interested in Alaska's premier business conference. That's what the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, is calling this. Go online to www.aksbdc.org/vitalize, and you can register there. And the conference runs from 8 to 5, and then after that, there will be a Shark Tank pitch contest held at a local brewery nearby. Then Thursday, I believe, from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. is Launch Alaska Demo Day. I think it's also held at the 49th State Brewing Company. And you can find out more about Launch Alaska at launchalaska.com. And I know there are a variety of workshops planned for Friday, the 29th. Again, to figure out what's going on next week, go online to alaskastartups.com. They'll have a listing of what's going on. All right. Before we go into the file, before we hear the first part of our North by North talk called Startups and Investors Across Alaska, and I promise you that audio is amazing, thanks to Hybrid Color for doing such a good job. Before we do that, let's hear a little bit from Jenny Marie Stryker, and then we'll go into the main file. That's awesome. Hope you guys are loving summer. Talk to you soon.
I'm definitely in love with Alaska. And right now I'm in love with Alaska and I want to live in Anchorage. But then the question is, am I going to go to Southeast and be like, oh, it's a magical wonderland. They have less snow. Also, I love the rain for some reason now and I want to live there forever. I don't know.
Well, Southeast is also a magical wonderland, as is South Central. Yeah.
So we'll see.
Alaska does beautiful and epic pretty well.
They really do. They really, really do. Yeah. And especially, I'm super excited for the summer. So,
tell me about this podcast.
So, this podcast is our North by North panel, which was a quote unquote cool talk, which was named by North by North. And it was a panel with investors and entrepreneurs from across Alaska. And I thought it was a really interesting talk because we had such a diversity of perspectives. You had folks working in the rural space, working in the really urban space in Anchorage. But yeah, it's a pretty free-flowing conversation. It was an interesting room. For the folks listening, a lot of you might have been in that circle. But for the folks that weren't, we were literally just in a circle of chairs. And the end of the conversation really opened up that circle. So listen for installment number 2, because I think that one will really keep you on your toes.
Yeah, that's true. I was running around a bit. It was really kind of cool. The mic was getting passed left and right. Like, people really had a lot to say. And there's no substitute for, as good as we're getting with technology, there's still no substitute for in-person interaction and roundtables like this. So, your final deep thought before we go to the deep, sweet cut that you've put together.
My final deep thought is just gratitude and happiness to have been a part of this community, to have learned so much, to get the privilege to edit these things and to talk to as many people as I have. I think gratitude is the thing that's been at the top of my mind, and a great thing to always have at the top of your mind. So that's my deep thought. Be grateful.
You heard it from Jenny Marie Stryker, cultivate gratitude. I agree. Let's go to the first part of this wonderful North by North talk entitled Startups Investors in Cross Alaska. Here we go.
I appreciate all of you. Thank you for joining us for this inaugural 49SAF Pod Live. I'm going to walk around and recognize who our panelists are. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Joe Morrison, director of the 49th State Angel Fund, a 6-year journey that has been remarkable in so many ways as we've built a venture capital function operating out of City Hall. More on that later. All right, so panelist number 1, please tell us who you are and what you do. And I would like a Twitter pitch, so 240 characters or less. Who you are and what you do, short, sweet, and to the point.
I'm convinced you got more than 240 characters just now. My name is Paul Hackemuller. I am the business development director with Spruce Root Community Development based in Juneau. We provide small business loans and technical assistance, business plan coaching to entrepreneurs in Southeast Alaska.
Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Middlestat. I'm the fund manager for the Bristol Bay Development Fund. We are an equity investment fund providing products and non-capital resources to entrepreneurs in the Bristol Bay region and to those businesses who demonstrate a direct benefit to the region. The Twitter pitch is equity products and non-capital resources for small businesses, 3 C's, capital, connection, and communities.
Now I'm really intimidated. My name is Amy Ferdine, and by day I am a mild-mannered chief financial officer for Cook Inlet Tribal Council, a human services nonprofit, but I also get to wear my superhero cape, and I am the chief financial officer for Eline Media, video game company that helped us launch the first indigenous video game made with an entire community. And so we are impact investors at Cook Inlet Tribal Council, and we ask people to join us on our journey.
My name is Brandon Howard. I'm the owner and founder of Amalga Distillery in Juneau, Alaska, and we're striving to create an agricultural value-added product in a really beautiful package using locally grown grain right here in Alaska. Thank you, guys.
All right, I'm gonna make Seacrest roll with it. So you two.
Hi, I'm John Seacrest. I run the Seattle Angel Conference. I make new angel investors in our community, and then I work on the open coffee and lean startup programs in Seattle to get smarter and stronger entrepreneurs so that we get more entrepreneurs funded by more angels.
I'm Paul Wiltsey. I'm a principal in the Venture North Group, which is a merger and acquisition advisory firm, and also a principal in a venture capital fund called Anchorage Equity Partners.
Good afternoon. I'm Zoe Marudas, founder CEO of Alaska's baby food called Bambinos. My sole purpose is to help nurture a healthier economic and baby generation. We use Alaskan grown, and my other focus is kind of helping with nutrition and development beyond the baby food stages.
Hi, I'm Ben Besworth. I'm a member of Atently. We do crowd sentiment analysis and am looking for, I'll let him talk about it more, actually.
Yeah, is this going around to every person? Or? Okay. I am the last panelist. I'm Eric Soley, co-founder and CEO of Atently, and we help political campaigns develop more effective messages using automated and artificial intelligence technologies.
So those are all our panelists, and one of the interesting things about these panelists are we have, for want of a better word, investor. And we have an investor from Southeast and an investor from the western shores of Alaska, Bristol Bay, and Cook Inlet, which invests in South Central and beyond. And we have a Seattle-based investor who is helping angel networks form from San Diego to Canada. And we have startups across Alaska. We have a startup in Juneau, right? And I don't know if it's fair to call Zoe a startup anymore. Are you still a startup?
I think you're always a startup till there's an exit.
So Zoe's a startup, and she's really tough. How long have you been doing it?
Almost 5 years.
Okay, so I mean that's amazing, right? And of course we have Atently, and Atently is based in the great metropolis where it's, in February a cool negative 58 degrees. Where are you based?
Fairbanks, Alaska.
Fairbanks in the house. So we wanted to have this panel to talk about what has been something that has slowly taken hold in Anchorage, and whether it is something that is growing and going to take place across the state. And that is the need to invest in ourselves as there's wealth in the state, to make sure we're deploying that capital locally, which is kind of my day job, and to make sure that we're building companies locally. In small counties across the United States, there's a distillery that's famous for employing the vast majority of its workforce in Kentucky, right? And the distillery is called Jack Daniel's. And in small counties in Washington State, there is a large furniture manufacturer called Watson. There is a boat manufacturer called Safe Boats International, and they're based in a county of 300,000 people. And they're worldwide businesses. So this is the conversation we've been having in Alaska, and what I'd like to do now, so we've got investors, we have entrepreneurs. I'd like the entrepreneurs to tell us the story of their business, and let's start with Fairbanks.
All right, yeah, so this is Eric with Atently in Fairbanks, and my entire life I've really enjoyed communication, human communication, public speaking. I'm not the greatest public speaker, but I love it. And I was trying to develop another project that was kind of separate from this, and I was looking for developers, because that's actually a big problem unless you're from the developer community, software developers. It's really hard to find them, particularly in Fairbanks. So I was at a startup weekend at the Hub. I see some familiar faces from that couple of days, which I assume most people know what a startup weekend is. And my idea was just to work throughout the weekend on a business plan and create a little team around it, and hopefully some software developers would fall from the sky and I could bring them over to my other kind of pet project. And we ended up winning the startup weekend with this idea for an app that understands how audiences are engaging with a public speaker. And we sort of rolled with that. And then there's a series of business plan competitions and so on throughout the state that gave us a little bit of capital, but a lot of sort of validation. Went through the entire startup ecosystem in Alaska, culminating in the accelerator program, the Launch Alaska Accelerator. Graduated from that, and during all those learnings, understanding the lean process and so on, pivoting to different customer segment, different value propositions, et cetera. And now we are, I would like to say, off to the races, at least running, like we're at least in the races, right? So that's a little bit of the story there.
So my background is what really kind of helped mold into who the company is today. My parents have a Pizza Olympia. We immigrated from Greece in '84 when I was 4 years old. They were organic farmers. Food manufacturing was just not in the word of manufacturing. It was just creating something with love and quality. And so through all my years of being in a restaurant and working in the restaurant, from every angle of the business, whether it is from bussing the tables to cooking the food to doing the accounting, payroll, all of that was all part of my life. And most importantly, my mother, she would always say, look at our clients, make sure that they're enjoying their meals, because if they're not in, you'd have to read your client who's sitting at the table, are they enjoying that experience? And then, of course, you're making something that tastes good and it's healthy and it's good for them. So my passion and commitment was always medicine. So I went off to medical school, started at Baylor University, did my research in gynecological oncology and geriatrics. Neurology was absolutely amazing, but I had to pick between family and because it was about 19-hour days, but the thrill of neurology was absolutely amazing. But there was one thing that was very unique and very specific, which I think my background made me notice, and that was the quality care of nutrition that was provided in the hospitals. How can we expect our patients to recover, or families who have different autoimmune or sensory concerns or things like that to recover when we're not giving them the best nutrients? So that was my first implementation of bringing my two backgrounds together while I was at Hillcrest Hospital, that we kind of helped reform their menus. But what was more specifically was reform it with a budget in a timely fashion, that way you can mass produce the product throughout the hospital and use it for many different purposes. So that's how I started unintentionally with Bambinos. And then when I came back to the state, it was really evident to me that we have a lot of allergies, which is very common across the nation, and child obesity, which is type 2 diabetes, cholesterol, heart disease, things that we should never really see in children. So I refocused my attention to specific to infant development and nutritional needs, and noticed that in the manufacturing industry, it wasn't specifically what we were finding in the retail market was something that would address the child's development or the type of food we needed to have the proper nourishment. It was more focused on the regards of how fast can we reproduce it? How cheap can we make it? How fast can we get it across the state with the shelf life and things like that? So I said, well, there is a balance, and with Alaskan Opportunity of our Alaskan-grown vegetables with a purity quality, I ended up finding out that we have the best resources, and of course, that makes an opportunity for an Alaskan business to go national.
I think I have a bit of a romantic story that leads up to opening the business. It's been in the plans for the last 6 years or so, and then as it grew and evolved, kind of a different vision for what my business can actually be and what it is. I am quite the introvert. I live in a little tiny dry cabin on the ocean in Juneau, and I've always really romanticized the single malt distilleries of Scotland. And my dream, when I grow up, I want to be, was very humbly just a employee of any sort in a distillery, specifically on Islay, an island off of the coast of Scotland. Very, very specific. And so I sent letters, I made phone calls, I made emails, and I got so many no's. You just would not believe it. They only hire locals, but it's an island of 3,000 people. And you were mentioning earlier, Joe, these amazing businesses that employ entire communities. This is an island of 3,000 people that has 8 of the world's most well-known and prominent distilleries on the planet, on a tiny little island. In 40 minutes, you can go to 8 of the most spectacular distilleries on the planet. It's amazing the driving force that Islay is. So after having all of these no's, I kind of stubbornly said, well, I'm just going to do it myself in my own community that I love very much. So decided irrationally, looking back, to start a distillery in Juneau, Alaska. And we've been open for almost a year now. It took about a little over 4 years of planning. I did get to live my dream briefly and do an apprenticeship on Islay. It was everything that I hoped it would be. But over those 4 years, this vision of what I want the distillery to be has shifted. And I'm really excited about the volume of Alaskan grain that we get to use. And I get to be this kind of pretty poster child and vehicle for encouraging agriculture in the state. And that is such a privilege. Each batch of the gin that we make uses about 8,000 pounds of Alaskan grown barley. And we're currently on batch 15. So doing the math, we've consumed a lot of barley. We are currently floor malting, another completely irrational thing. It's incredibly inefficient, but about 4,000 pounds of Alaskan barley from Delta so that we can use it in our brewing and whiskey making processes. And long term, I would like for 100% of the grain that I use to be coming from Alaska. And we're tiny, but my end goal is to be as large as Scotland's smallest distillery. So currently we produce about 150 to 200 barrels per year. Scotland's smallest distillery produces about 1,200 barrels per year. And each barrel that I produce consumes about 3,000 to 4,000 pounds of grain. So when I call farmers in the state, and I had a great conversation with the folks at Vanderweel Farms recently, just north of here, the amount of barley that he grew last year would make about 10 barrels for me. So what my business can do to expand their capacity is really exciting. Alaska is a state that does a great job with extraction and does very little with adding value. And it's something we're looking at doing more of in the fisheries, and it's something that I have an opportunity to do with agricultural products in the state. So right now, the gin is shipped throughout the rest of the state. This fall, our goal is to begin shipping into the Japanese market, which is really exciting because they're hungry for Alaskan products, craft products, and I love getting to visit Japan, so there'll be kind of a perk there. And so we can create a value-added product with an endless shelf life that is readily exportable and help support Alaska's agriculture.
So I wonder if I can audible to, I know, totally didn't prepare you for this. This is Jenny Marie Stryker. She's worked with me for the last few months. She has taken over the podcasts at various points, and I'm just going to see how she does. So if you would take us through question 2 with some of the investors, I'd appreciate it. And anything else you want to add, go for it. And Jenny Marie has recorded some of her own podcasts. I encourage you to listen to them. Here she goes.
My intro to this question would be funnier and wittier, just for reference and posterity. But for the investors, how do we encourage the formation of more startups in Alaska? And I think that's simply put and well written, so good job, Joe. Investor Paul.
Well, that's an excellent question. It seems that what we've run into doing the merger and acquisition company that we have, we see that there's lots of capital around to buy companies that are, or sell companies that are well-formed, been in business for a while, have a good track record of earnings. But there really isn't a really good entrepreneurial capital formation program here in Alaska. That's thanks to programs like 49th State Fund and Launch Alaska. That's improving and getting better, but it's still fundamentally weak. There's just not enough capital for startups. We see in our office maybe one great idea a week, but they need support to bring to fruition, and they need startup money. And there's just not enough of that to go around. So it's an issue here. I hail from Atlanta when I was younger, and it's everywhere. There's startup capital everywhere in other places, other larger communities. Anchorage needs a little more infrastructure, on making your idea appealing to investors who might otherwise invest, and also finding that capital. Because a lot of fairly well-to-do folks here aren't really ready to invest in a startup. They're much more conservative here than what I've seen in other places. Mm-hmm.
So continuing with the investors, and the investors helping me understand how can we encourage more Alaska startup formation. What do you think, Amy?
I think one of the most important things is to recognize that it's really intimidating to start something new. Investors like myself and other investors throughout Alaska and across the U.S., they really do tend to grill people. And so we're looking for people who are passionate. So I see that here, which is great. People who understand their industry, people who understand the basic business growth concepts and understand how to protect their intellectual property or where they're going and what their exit strategy is. And that's really intimidating for individuals who don't know that. I don't know if Cindy remembers this, but the first time I met Cindy, Cook and the Tribal Council was investing in our people through a program called the Individual Development Counts. And we funded the purchase of housing by encouraging 2-to-1 savings match for our participants, or education and businesses. So those were our 3 areas. And out of all the participants we served in a 5-year period, which was hundreds, only 2 wanted to start a business. And when we talked to our participants about what was holding them back, it was the sheer intimidation about, how do I apply for a loan? How do I secure equity? What do all these complex terms mean? So you may have a small motor mechanic who is stellar, and people would go to that person because they trust him and he's built a reputation in his home community, but he doesn't know how to translate that to a business. So I think a lot of times, I think having access to be able to apprentice under experts, I think is one of the really important things. But I think also having the mentorship in the community is really critical. So programs like Launch Alaska, I think, are very important.
This is Cindy, and I'm going to follow along on what Amy just described. When I think about increasing or promoting the formation or startup sector, I think about how can we break down those walls and develop, lack of a better word, a matrix of milestones and checklists on how to navigate the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I think breaking down the fear of credit and access to capital is another. Introductory financing products that allow entrepreneurs to get a feel for what that might look like. And oftentimes, I know for the Bristol Bay region and the work the Bristol Bay Development Fund is doing is we're talking about microtransactions. So transactions that are typically going to range from the 50,000, maybe as high as 100,000 to do that work too, but just to bring a comfort to the process and familiarity, and I call it a kind of a cohort or a community of support, because it truly does take a village to raise a business and to support that business long term.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything that's already been said. I think the Launch Alaskas and the Startup Weekends and Otis and the Alaska Angel Network, these are all very important. This, much like Cindy, the space that we work in Spruce Root in Southeast Alaska, our clients, by and large, we focus on the rural communities, rural Alaska. And so when we talk about startups, the clients and the businesses that we work with are, I think, fundamentally different than a lot of the startup clients that you would see trying to run through Launch Alaska. And given the how geographically dispersed and remote a lot of the communities, much of the communities in Alaska are, a good number of these communities, the people there want to have a business that has a positive impact on their community, their local economy, their local environment, to be able to support them and their family and fill some need. They're not trying to hit that 10x on the investment. I mean, they're not looking for $20 million in revenue 5 years from now. They're not talking about things like an exit strategy. So that's intimidating, but they're not looking for an exit strategy because they just want to sustain themselves and their families. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a lot that can be done with those types of business owners and potential business owners in Alaska, and those services look a little bit different than targeting those traditional startup support and activities. And so for us, that looks like a lot of what's kind of already been discussed, but hand-holding. So what does it mean to apply for a loan? Is it okay to borrow money to run a business? Even looking for an equity investment or bringing on a partner is a lot of people don't want to do that. So creating programming and support that can meet these entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs at the level that they're at, bearing in mind their ultimate goal, which may look different and much more local than a traditional startup discussion would have.
So I appreciate everything the investors said, and we're going to go to the entrepreneurs shortly to have their answer as to what we can do to encourage increased startup formation in Alaska. I want to say that one other way to think of this question is, how do we encourage increased private sector activity and private sector emerging companies within Alaska? Not specifying necessarily what a startup is. So I'm going to come to you, even though you're not from here and you're visiting and you're proposing ways to work in this community. John, help me understand what we can do and what the rest of America can do, because this startup conversation is great on the coasts and it's great in metro areas of 1 million plus, and it's great where there's technologists, but the rest of us we're struggling a little bit. Help me understand how we can have increased private sector company formation within Alaska.
So the fundamental notion is that anywhere you go, there are entrepreneurs. So if there are entrepreneurs, people who are willing to scratch at itches of some kind, then there's also people who are willing to fund them. So across the United States, 10% of the United States is legally allowed by the federal government to write angel checks. And if you have a crowdfunding law, which Alaska does, then you open it up for another 25 to 50% of the population capable of being part of the process. And so then the question is, why are they not doing it, right? 1% of the people legally allowed to write angel checks write checks. So 99% don't. What's the reason? I suspect the reason, everybody says it's too high risk. I don't even think we're at that point. I think we're at the point where people don't even know that they're part of the club, and they don't even know it's possible, and they think that it's something that those guys over there do. But in fact, any community can do it. So the first angel conference I put together was in Corvallis, a city of 50,000 people, and we weren't writing $200,000 checks by individuals. We were writing $5,000 checks. So there are ways for groups of people to work together to solve the problem, and that's the Seattle Angel Conference recipe that I work on now. But if you look at the communities, in those communities, there are people who are succeeding at business. So peer learning groups help you grow the relationships that allow you to build resilience in the community. The same thing's true if you have an entrepreneurial side, a startup side. All of those things that you need to make that flow also is true on the investor side. So of those 99% that have never invested, they probably never had a conversation about investing. So there's a peer learning group on the investor side to build as well. So if you work through the ecosystem and you find the place where the water's not flowing anymore, and you crank that open a little bit and get some flow, and then go to the other side and keep turning them up, open coffee, figure out what resources there are, lean startup, figure out how to do customer development before you spend money on product development, angel conferences, get investors to talk each other and write their first check and discover it. So there are these little tiny programs that when you string them together in a pearl necklace, both the entrepreneur side and the investor side then start flowing and connecting out of that. And so our current program in Seattle, been running 6 years, $5,000 checks from the investors to invest, but we've deployed $2.5 million by adding them all up. So lots of little steps all add together to make big steps. And so every community, whether it's 30,000 people or 1 million people, can find critical members of the community that are capable of moving the step forward. When you move that step forward and win, more money comes back in the system and it goes faster. It's a very long journey, right? We're talking a 20-year journey here to make the flow go fast enough that everybody says it's great, but step by step, lots of little connections.
So Paul's following on. Go ahead, Paul.
One thing about the merger and acquisition company that we've learned is that there's a type of person who has a company that they've built from an ember and are now ready to divest it. And these folks are a different breed. They're the ones who took the risk 20 years ago and they built something unbelievable and they divest. And so what do they do with their capital? Well, these are folks who are willing to take risk. And we're finding that in Anchorage, now that folks are starting to turn over their companies and sell their businesses, these are the folks who are reinvesting in startups. So we've found that it's a very different mindset. If you've had your business and you've run it to ground and you've divested, maybe because you're tired of doing something or it got too big, you got to a place where it was mostly human resources and not what you love to do. They sell their businesses and then all of a sudden they show up. They're knocking at the door saying, well, show me something else. And we're seeing a lot of that, and that seems to be almost a new type of investor that we're starting to see here in Anchorage.
So that's a lot from the investors on what we can do to see more startups in Alaska. We heard education. I think we heard small individualized funding amounts, making sure we're funding all kinds of businesses, not just 20x businesses, but people who want a lifestyle business or people who want to serve their local community. We heard about the need to create other pieces of infrastructure from both Paul and John. And so those are a lot of ideas. I'd like the entrepreneurs to give us new ideas, okay? So that's your task. You can't repeat anything, Brandon. Because what a lot of investors say is deal flow. I can't find the startups. I just can't find a startup. And probably what Eric's saying is like, I'm right here. I'm right here. I'm happy to talk to you about taking a check. I'm right here. But we do need more startups because there's an element of traditional angel investing, a conference program, 40 startups walk in the door, one gets funded. That's a 2.5% selectivity rate. That's really hard to do in Alaska. So whatever we can do to increase scale, we need to do. We won't get there necessarily, but what can we do to have more startups here? However you define the term, Brandon.
Yeah. I think I'm going to start off by talking about some of the things that I'm not going to repeat it, but talk about some of the things that the investors brought up. And then talk about the startup culture I see in Juneau. Paul, you mentioned a certain level of conservatism with investors. When I first started, I was very lucky to have a mentor in California who his thing is mentoring entrepreneurs. He has an amazing network, and my business plan was not perfect. I did not have the technical chops or know the lingo. I got a very healthy serving of humble pie with John tonight. I still don't know the lingo, but I'm here to learn. I'm passionate. I'm excited. And they saw that. They saw a viable business model, and they're like, let's go down this road together. Let's do it. And I said, thank you, but I want local money. I want to keep the wealth. I want to keep the money in my community. And I'm proud of doing that, but I also kick myself because, as you mentioned, I got dragged over the coals from my investors. They're used to investing in property. They're used to investing in businesses that were already up and running and successful. They're investing in less dynamic systems than my own. I was creating a product that you don't know what it's going to be for many years. I was creating a brand from the ground up. I had to connect with people, and people had to connect with me. And as I mentioned before, I'm horribly introverted and live in a cabin on my own in the woods. And so, it was really tough getting Alaskan investors to want to go on this ride with me. And so due diligence was rigorous. And the deal that I had to broker for them, and due diligence, I'm sorry, it should be rigorous, but it should not be demoralizing. And, if you don't want to take the risk, don't take the risk, because there is a risk with startups. But it was tough. And the deal that I ended up brokering wasn't this cherry deal that I could have had if I would have gone with the out-of-state money. And so for those reasons, sometimes I do regret it. Now, so basically, if you believe in somebody as an investor, encourage them. I got tons of encouragement from Paul. My business wasn't necessarily one that made sense for him, but he's been an amazing resource for me for probably 3 years now, maybe more. So moving on to the startup side of it, I want to address something that a lot of people have been talking about, which is this very kind of lifestyle business, not necessarily having an exit programmed in. Alaskan startups, I think that they can have broader vision. You can leave the state. We can do commerce outside of the state. We can be more ambitious. And as an example, there is a new startup in Juneau that I am probably the biggest fanboy of. I give them free space to package and ship out of in my basement. They're Barnacle Foods. They're the kelp salsa folks. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of them. They're amazing. And every single day I talk with the founders and, kind of just try and drill it into them that the blue sky that they have, like what their business can be, is amazing. I mean, if you look at stats on mariculture in the state, kelp is going to be huge. And they are about the most darling faces of kelp you could possibly have. They have an excellent product that introduces people to it in a really just quality way. And seeing them slowly start to realize, oh my goodness, we do need a commercial kitchen of our own. Oh my goodness, we do need help. We can't bootstrap this thing out of your basement that you're letting us live out of. And so I think it's a two-part thing. Investors look at your entrepreneurs as something more, be willing to take some level of risk. Investing in my brand was not like investing in a piece of property that you're going to be leasing. And then once you have, be supportive. It's good to be demanding, but at the same time, understand that it's a dynamic system. It's not this stagnant, static system that a lot of investors are used to. And then for Alaskan startups, support one another. And push each other because we can bring it further than just Juneau, Alaska. I can export further than just the 1.5 million cruise ship passengers that get off and walk by my door. They're a great way for me to support myself in the beginning and bootstrap, but I have vision beyond that, and I think that a lot of other Alaskan entrepreneurs do as well.
Oh my gosh. When I first started Bambinos, before I even pitched the company, before I even talked to people, I really researched every opportunity possible and tried to punch holes in every angle that I could possibly do. There was a great drive. I went to Baylor. I had great connections there. I was working with the hospitals, similar scenario. I had great interest with opportunity to get funded by out of state. But then I said, well, what really makes our product extremely unique and very different, other than combining my medical background and talking about, the balanced nutrition, is that complete traceability and clear, pure foods, which is what our Alaskan agriculture is. If you many of the different farming communities down south, you see all the topsoil, just like we do with the snow here in the middle of winter, where we haul all the top snow and take it into a consolidation place to melt. That's exactly what happens with the farming communities down south, and that's to reduce crop rotation, which means then you're going to introduce more pesticides, more herbicides, or do some kind of modifications to the soil, burn it, do whatever, add the nutrients in it. So I said, okay, this is why I'm saying Alaska. Alaska has that pure slate. If I go out, I'm going to compromise my product by not having that viable, pure ingredient that parents are looking for. So when I came back to the state, it was how do I pitch it? Who do I pitch it to? I didn't even know where to go to. And actually, it was very beginning is when we first met with Joe. And at the time, I did my research thinking the only way Bambinos is going to be a successful business, successful in the financial term, not successful in the mission purpose-driven entity, was to do mass production. To this day, I'm still working towards that. I didn't take the opportunity that was available here with us because it set me in the similar scenario of when I was cooking at my parents' restaurant. I recreated a little restaurant or little kitchen manufacturing facility now, but I'm still looking for that mass production because that is how Bambinos is going to be successful. And to this day now, as I followed my business plan and the staircases of how the angles have changed, the business ethics and the mission of it has stayed the same, and the purpose of how the business can become successful is still the same. But what happened now is I ended up I took that conservative route, saying, all right, I can't get the investors to invest in me at the beginning where say I need to go to mass production and I need to have the facility here in Alaska. So I recreated something smaller, something safer that I could handle on my own with my family and with my community, which is our investors were our clients. So now again, I'm in another step thinking, all right, it's still here. We still said at the beginning, we need that mass production. And now as we got into card, because before, let me backtrack, before my only distribution opportunity was national market through online sales, through subscription service, and that did very well to maintain and grow the company. Now we're approaching the retail market, which means now you're not going to have the overhead, you're not going to have that opportunity as you would when you're dealing direct to consumer. So then it balances back to, all right, now let's bring back in the books. Let's talk about bringing the mass production. How do we do that with the technologies and make it in a conservative, lean way? I really appreciated what you mentioned earlier in regards to entrepreneurs come back and say, let me help new entrepreneurs. I promise you, even now, every opportunity, everything that I have learned through this journey, this entrepreneurial, whimsical, but absolutely in love journey, is that I want to give back and share what I have learned to help teach others or help give others a voice and opportunity to learn, because there is a balance that you do have to have great faith in yourself, great faith in your company, and know your company and know many avenues of it, so that way you can do. I'm still learning every day. I have no idea where I'm going to be really 3 months from now, but I can say I will have learned and evolved. But again, the purpose and the mission of the company remains the same. I wish that we can find more of that synergy, whether it is that we're reaching out to rural communities and we're making that health impact, either by using the different types of resources they have, like our salmon and halibut that we use in our baby food, and say, is there an opportunity to go with the different types of tribes or communities that have investment groups here, or is it out of state? Because the point of health and nutrition ties into anybody across our country or anywhere across our world. So it does become an open market of who loves the mission and the purpose of what we're doing to help invest and help us grow.
Yeah, I see two. It's just a hard act to follow. Yeah, more startups. So people talked about a whole bunch of different ideas that they're all pretty good, I think. Education, especially. So I see two major things that we need to do. The first is education. Amy talked about education of the entrepreneurs, some of the tools and systems that are in place in Alaska already to do that. I think most of the people here are probably fairly familiar with those tools. An extension of that is sort of mentoring and mentorship networks. I know Jacqueline and Nigel are putting together a pretty cool statewide mentoring network right now. And then encouraging the entrepreneurs to get outside of the state, to not necessarily relocate their business outside of the state, but to reach out for advice and networks and people that can help get you clients, get you prospects, get you, a bigger advisory board, et cetera. I just got off the plane an hour ago from DC, and in the last 2 days, we just exploded our political network. I mean, it was a fairly recent pivot to come to politics, and we learned so much about the space, so much about how politics works, particularly in the United States, and built that network massively in just 2 days in DC. So that's the biggest lesson I had from the last couple of days. It's very fresh. The other side of education is I was really happy to hear John's work down in Washington, because educating the investors as well is critical. They have a lot of very wealthy people in the state that I know don't really realize that angel investing is a thing that they could do. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure you can. I'm pretty sure that you are in that accredited investor status, but it takes education. So it's both educating the entrepreneurs and educating the investors. And I think that there's, I'm sure you guys do this in your programs down in Washington, John, where educating the investors on what are we bringing to the table besides the money as well. How are we supporting these entrepreneurs following the investment round with our networks? And how do we leverage the non-monetary resources that we have to benefit the entrepreneurs? But the second thing after education that I don't hear being said very much is, to me, the biggest thing is we need a win. We need a big win in Alaska. We need a company that succeeds, that scales, that gets really, really just financially successful as much as I recognize that there are so many other reasons to start a business and we all have our own visions for our companies. Being financially successful is something, it's a lighthouse. It's like that first big customer, that lighthouse customer that other people look at and then they want to buy from you as well. If investors in Alaska are like, hey, this is a company that we can point to that happened a few years ago. I wasn't in that deal, but they killed it. And now I'm going to take new startups coming along the bend a lot more seriously. And in the same vein, entrepreneurs in the state need a role model to look up to. They need a company that's not Google, that's not Amazon, that's not Elon Musk, somebody that they read about in books, but somebody that went to their high school that they can look at and be like, they did it. And they did it not that long ago. And they did it in a big way. And people are still talking about that. I know them, I can talk to them, I want to reach out to them, and maybe I can do that myself as well. So one of the people in DC that we were staying with actually was Tyler Arnold. He's from Alaska, and he's doing some really cool things in politics down there. There's Mark Jablanowski from Alaska, who's doing some amazing stuff in the political space down there. So these are people that I'm looking up to, but they're not in Alaska. We need an Alaskan startup that's a big win with a capital W. Actually, I'm not sure what everybody's goals are for how big they want to scale their company, but I would guess that most of the entrepreneurs in this room are shooting to be that win and should be. So,
all right, go be a win. That's awesome. Sweet. Okay, so we have people who want to talk here, and then we're going to come to investors about another question.
So I fell into this economic development mindset, and I've started thinking about the Northwest in a particular way. So following on your thoughts, if you think of the Northwest states as countries of Europe, and then you compare them with the Nordics, what does that mean? Washington against Sweden, Alaska against Estonia. Estonia is 1.3 million. They had Skype. Everybody said, oh my God, we can do Skype. Now they have hundreds of companies coming out of it with Latitude 59, and Finland is doing Slush, which is South by Southwest of North by Northeast in Finland in December, and they have 20,000 people show up. So why are there not 20,000 people showing up here for startup things? Because you're not thinking of yourself in that space. It's a what can we do question in our heads, not a what resources do we have question. I mean, the Estonians didn't have anything in 1991. The Russians took everything out of the country. They didn't have a government. They don't have any written laws because they're all digital, right? So they started in 1991, and now they're doing tremendous things. There's no reason why Alaska can't do those tremendous things if you decide to. And that's where the barrier is.
Okay, so we've covered startups in Alaska, how we can get more of them. Whole lot of ideas. Need a lighthouse. We need education. We need mentor networks. There are more things to build, and somebody someday will probably listen to this podcast, create a list, and build it. But before that, Paul Wiltsey's going to give us his wisdom.
Well, just one thought here. In terms of mentors and investors, sometimes that works out. Almost never. What you really need to find is mentors who are either people who do what you do, or they're these people who it's their mission to make things better. Those are the people who are going to be in your court. Investors, quite often, are folks who, for an early stage company, they realize they have what you need, and you need it more than they need it. There's 1,000 places for an investor to put their money, but you need their money. So they have a lot of market power, and they can be unreasonable about how much equity they want or what interest rate they want, and it's not atypical for all of us to have seen that. Later on, once your idea becomes prominent and you've done really well, then all of a sudden the value of the investor goes way down. You know, you can get a bank loan at 6%, but up front, someone wants 50% of your company, even though you've developed the idea. So just realize there's kind of a cycle there, and the investor sometimes is a mentor and a guiding force behind your. I find them all the time, but more typically, it's these folks who are the people who make it happen for you.